TIL. Dan Savage, the American author who founded the non-profit organization It Gets Better Project in 2010, is also known for coining, in 2001, the term pegging to describe a woman anally penetrating a man with a strap-on dildo. Don't leave out the definition of Santorum. He also used a word based on former Senator Rick Santorum. More importantly, he coined the term Santorum, and later associated the word Santorum to describe the frothy mixture of lube and shot that is a byproduct of anal sex. Pretty sure he also coined Santorum too. And Santorum, clapping hands, nerd face, clapping hands. He's also responsible for the Santorum problem. Not to mention the phrase Santorum. I'm starting to think he might have also coined the term Santorum. He is also the man who fat-shamed and bullied Lindy West and inspired her to write the article that led to the book and series Shrill in response. She essentially accused him of being a giant hypocrite because people have felt the same way about him as the gay man that he feels about her. You are gross. Don't touch me. BC, I don't see anyone saying why pegging was coined. Back in the old seafaring days, there was rumor that the cabin boy would sit on a peg, so as to loosen his anus. That's where pegging was born. I won't comment on the pedo angle to it, but hey, the 2000s were crazy times, a term they used that I really took to heart as a campground rule. In short, leave it better than you found it. It is good advice for all relationships and especially when one partner is older or more experienced. Don't leave a mess of STDs, unplanned pregnancy, or emotional baggage. Not to mention the phrase Santorum as a frothy mixture to lube and fecal matter on one's penis after aggressive anal sex. Named in honor of Florida politician Rick Santorum, who said some outrageous and angering opinions, which compared to Republicans now, are probably quite mild. That can't be true. I went to college in the 90s and someone walked in on the guy across the hall from me getting pegged by his girlfriend. I remember us referring to him as Peggy when we were talking about him. And we definitely didn't come up with it ourselves either. I used to read Savage Love in the copy of The Onion that got delivered to my house every month. And I'm a millennial from PA, so I obviously know he coined Santorum. I only recently discovered he and his husband are responsible for It Gets Better. My personal TIL is Dan Savage, who in 2001 coined the term pegging and later associated the word Santorum to describe the frothy mixture of lube and shot that is a byproduct of anal sex. Is also the founder of the 2010 It Gets Better project. I would like Dan Savage to address the It Gets Better ideology in the face of all the anti-trans and anti-gay legislation that is being passed in many American states and in some other countries as well. Is it really getting better? I used to love reading his weekly column every Thursday when it came out in the local free paper. Would read it during my lunch break, and everyone would talk about it. Used to be wild and hilarious. Pre-internet everywhere days. Lost every ounce of respect for him when bullied someone on the internet and it turned out he had the wrong person and nearly destroyed the guy's life. And, refused to apologize for the mistaken identity. He's a colossal asshole. He kind of veers on transphobia sometimes, unfortunately. Fits the mold of a trailblazer for gay rights that has a blind spot for trans people. I used to read Savage Love and The Stranger a bajillion years ago when I lived in Seattle. He's such a great writer. I haven't kept up with his writing since, but it looks like still writes for The Stranger. For those interested, they make L-shaped dildos for vaginal penetration as well for and the usual part for penetrating him, rather than trying to get a strap-on position for clitoral pleasure. I got to hang out with him a couple times in the late 90s, early 00s, friend of friends, and can confirm that he is everything you would expect him to be in person. Sly, no bullshit, and clever AF. He also coined fuck first, meaning on days like birthdays, Valentine's, etc. have sex then go to dinner. You won't be bloated and worried about anything by having sex before food. Dan Savage is a national treasure. I've been reading his columns since college and the nuance that he used on all aspects of sexuality have helped me be a better person and lover. Whatever you do, do not read his column on donkey punching. I don't know if he coined the term or not. Also, people sometimes do really weird things to get off. Is that the YouTube channel that has a visual glitch where it says it was made in 2004? Go to about and see when the channel was created. The guy has some useful insights, but I can never really forget how they treated Iraq war opponents in 2003. It just casts a pall over his work and I can't read him anymore. Dan taught young gave me a lot about relationships and enabled my successful open marriage with my husband. I highly recommend listening to the podcast, it's still great. I read the title too quickly and saw Dan Rather instead of Dan Savage. Glad I figured out my mistake before I googled Dan Rather pegging. Might be time to go to bed. More importantly, He coined the term Santorum to describe the common fecal matter expunged after gay sex. Named after Rick Santorum, anti-gay senator. Did this guy write for Maximum Rock and Roll back in the day? Savage Love, I think, was the article. In my high school punk days I looked forward to it. Savage also coined the GMFA expression when talking about sex partners who are hopelessly abusive. Dump the motherfucker already. Pretty sure he also coined Santorum too. That frothy mixture of lube and fecal matter that is sometimes a byproduct of anal sex. Dan Savage was huge for me in my early, mid-20s. He taught me a lot about people, and, when I was ready, taught me a lot about myself. A funny thing I remember about that whole thing was someone writing in to point out that strap-on is an anagram for no parts. Haven't listened to his Lovecast in a while, but he helped me understand lots of different relationships and nuance about it. Isn't he the guy who wrote opinion pieces? Is that what they're called? In The Stranger? It was called Savage Love, I think. Used to read Savage Love in The Stranger all the time. Learn a lot about relationships, sex, and LGBTQ perspectives. Loveline was amazing. I remember listening to him late at night on my drive home from my restaurant job when I was 16. Weird. I always thought pegging was when someone was anally penetrated with the heel of a shoe. Lol. TIL. He didn't coin it, but he probably is responsible for it being a more popular term in the general public. Thank you, Dan Savage. Before you, it took so many more words to explain what I want for my birthday. Nobody used the word pegging for dildos on women before 2000. I can't wrap my mind around that. Really, that has only been around that long? I would figure that was around since at least the 60s. I'm old enough to have read the original column on paper. Apologies to anyone's Aunt Peg. Despite his work in charity, Dan Savage will always be pegged as the guy who coined. Ah, so that's the man responsible for that shitty campaign. Good to know who to hate now. I remember that I can't remember if I voted, but I thought pegging was a good choice. I remember him. He first made his bones as a columnist on The Onion back in the 90s. It gets better sounds like something you say to someone after a pegging sesh. That is not true. We used pegging in the 80s and it was an old term then. He solicited his readers for suggestions, then had an informal vote, so he was aware that it can get better or it can get worse, depending. A wealth of useful, nay extremely useful information from the internet. He got it right. You just gotta relax at Ring and it gets better. I know I heard about pegging a decade before this, maybe even earlier. Dan is a proper internet legend. Up there with the Sedaris siblings. Wait till you learn about Santorum. Who? You say? Yes, exactly. Nothing has gotten better. My shit dad sabotaged my shit life. Initially misread that as Doc Savage and was very confused. And let's not forget that Savage coined the term Santorum. He also wrote a pretty good book. Skipping towards Gamora, the ravioli is hot tonight. He also used a word based on former Senator Rick Santorum. Well, that's a dubious honor if I've ever seen one. Savage Love was such a great column. Man, I miss it. Dan Savage is a mad lad. I love his sex column work. He's also responsible for the Santorum problem. Smiley face.